The tourist tried to scare the guard with his dog, but his reaction shocks everyone, breaking the silence and revealing an unexpected secret. Jason was absolutely thrilled, having dreamed of a trip to the United Kingdom. For a long time, he finally managed to make his dream come true. The British monarchy, ancient traditions, and the royal guards, who he had seen so often in movies, had become for him a symbol of the majesty and mystery of this country. From the very start, he was determined to experience all these impressions. Like a movie tourist, strolling along the Thames riverwalks, taking a photo. In front of Big Ben, and of course, meeting the guards, whose silent stance was famous everywhere. He took his loyal companion with him, a huge black Rottweiler named Bax. He was an impressive dog with shiny black fur, highlighted by golden markings on his chest and paws. Bax was a truly powerful, muscular dog, nearly the size of a human. His confident posture and deep gaze made him not just a protector, but also a real center of attention wherever he went. Jason was sure that with such a friend, he had nothing to fear, and his faithful pet was ready to support him in any situation. Upon arriving in London, Jason headed straight to the famous landmarks. He was amazed by the beauty of the city, the majesty of the old buildings, and the incredible contrast between the modern and the historic. He held a map in his hands, carefully looking for his next destination. From his side, everything seemed perfect. The perfect tourist, with a camera in his hands, showing bright interest in everything around him. Bax, despite his imposing look, walked alongside, slowing his pace. Just a bit, watching everything carefully. When they finally reached the square where the royal guards were standing, Jason felt a jolt of excitement in his chest. He moved closer, filled with awe at the fact that he was witnessing this scene in real life. The guards, in their red uniforms and black copper helmets, stood still, not making a single movement. It was something incredible. In a way, even mystical. However, Jason, not fully understanding the traditions, gave in to temptation. He decided it was a perfect moment to have some fun and show his friends that he could interact with such strict figures. He called Bax over, signaling that it was time for him to joke with the guard. The dog, despite his large size and strength, obediently followed Jason, puffing out his chest and frowning slightly whenever his owner said something. The guard stood as he had before, as if not noticing anything around him. His eyes were fixed ahead, his hands holding muskets with the precision characteristic only of the most experienced soldiers. His uniform was impeccable, every detail, from the tall black boots to the red coat, with golden buttons, was admirable. There was not a single emotion on his face, and his entire appearance, regardless of external distractions, gave an impression of strict control and discipline. Jason, growing more confident that his joke would be a success, stepped back a little, to position Bax in front of the guard and show that the dog was ready to scare the sentinel. A spark of provocation flickered in Jason's eyes, but neither of them expected that the next moment would bring not just a mixed reaction from the onlookers, but a real turn of events. Jason was sure that his visit to London couldn't be complete without a joke. He had been thinking for a while about how to entertain the tourists who were immersed in the atmosphere of strict traditions. When he and Bax, his large black Rottweiler, reached the square where the royal guards were standing, Jason felt that the moment for his great joke had arrived. The guard stood at his post, seemingly unaware of anything around him. His red coat with golden buttons and black gaiters contrasted with the gray London sky. He was a perfect statue, motionless, focused, completely absorbed in his duties. The scene was so captivating that even the tourist crowd standing nearby couldn't hold back their admiration and whispers. Jason, like most people, was impressed by the discipline and silence of the guard. However, a thought began to form in his mind. What if I try to disturb him? He thought for a moment, then his gaze fell on his loyal companion, Bax. Despite his impressive size, the Rottweiler was quite obedient and attentive. Jason, always ready for fun challenges, decided that Bax was the perfect candidate to test the guard. With confidence, he approached and, with a slight smirk, said aloud, "Let's go, Bax. Time to liven this guy up a bit." With a smile on his face, Jason let go of the leash. Bax, accustomed to following him, instantly leaped forward, pulled on the leash, and curiously looked at the guard. The dog's large black eyes were filled with curiosity, and his powerful body, even without taking a step, seemed to occupy the space around him. When Bax realized that no one was holding him back, he took a few steps toward the guard, clearly aiming to attract the attention of onlookers. Jason started to laugh softly, anticipating the guard's reaction. He imagined the guard getting nervous, perhaps even moving to shoo the dog away. However, everything went off plan. Bax, who was far from a coward, suddenly stopped when he saw the motionless soldier before him. He didn't start barking or jumping, as Jason had expected. Instead, the Rottweiler narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at the guard, with clear interest, as if trying to figure out what this strange, still figure was. The guard, as if unaffected, showed no signs of worry. His face remained completely unfazed, his eyes cold and determined. He stood like a stone statue, not moving a muscle, despite the imposing dog standing just a few meters away. Jason was stunned. He hadn't expected the dog, who was always full of initiative and energy, to behave so calmly. Bax sniffed the guard's stand, then just sat next to him, continuing to study the sentinel. The strange scene drew the attention of other tourists who began filming the moment on their phones. One passerby even loudly noted, "Looks like this guard isn't even afraid of dogs." Jason, realizing that his attempt to entertain the crowd hadn't produced the expected result, felt a bit disoriented but couldn't help laughing. His dog seemed to have become part of this ancient silent performance, which, despite his efforts to disrupt it, continued its course uninterrupted. As he watched Bax sitting at the guard's feet, Jason suddenly realized that the guard himself had become a symbol of the steadfastness and discipline he so admired. Yet, deep inside, he felt slightly disappointed. The dog hadn't managed to scare the guard, but instead had created an even more astonishing moment. Dogs and guards, it turned out, had no interest in breaking their traditions for the sake of tourist fun. Bax stopped as if he had run into an invisible wall and sat right in front of the guard. His massive body tensed, his chest lifted, and his powerful paws rested evenly on the gray stone pavement. His heavy tail stilled, and only his ears slightly twitched, picking up the faintest sounds around him. Bax didn't attempt to approach the guard, but he also didn't look scared. He simply watched, carefully, assessing, as if trying to figure out this strange, motionless figure before him. Jason, standing a little behind, shook his head in confusion. This was unexpected. He had been expecting barking, a leap, or at least some attempt by the dog to investigate this new stranger. But instead, Bax seemed to have frozen in a strange, silent agreement with what was happening. And the guard? He didn't even glance down. The man in the red coat and massive black hat remained a stone statue. His hands gripped the rifle firmly, his gaze was fixed ahead, and his face maintained that cold, almost intimidating indifference that drove tourists mad. His uniform fit perfectly. The fabric stretched smoothly, with no creases, every detail appearing as though it had been pressed and measured with a ruler. His black boots sparkled in the sun and the belt, tight around his waist, made his figure even more stern and unyielding. The tourist crowd, which had been watching quietly until then, suddenly grew more interested. Someone took out their phone and began filming. This was no longer just a moment when a tourist and his dog encountered a guard. It felt like a test. The whole scene felt tense. The mighty Rottweiler and the majestic guard, both seemingly waiting for the other to break the standoff. But Jason wasn't the type to stand on the sidelines. He felt that his little joke was on the verge of becoming an ordinary awkward moment. He had to do something. "Come on, Bax." Jason clapped his hands, his voice sounding cheerful but slightly nervous. "Bark, woof, come on, boy, show who's boss." Bax didn't move. He blinked slightly but didn't make a sound. Jason furrowed his brow. Everything was going wrong. He leaned closer to the dog, trying to encourage him. "Bax, I command you, speak. Bark, come on, boy." He made an energetic gesture with his hand, as if pushing the dog into action. But Bax just gave his tail a slight twitch and stilled again. No bark followed. The guard didn't move an inch, didn't blink, didn't turn his head. He was still the embodiment of iron discipline. The crowd whispers began. Some people quietly laughed. Others snickered. Cameras kept rolling. Jason felt a growing sense of irritation. Something was off. Why wasn't Bax reacting? Why was this guard still standing there as if he didn't notice him, the dog, or the onlookers around them? He straightened up, feeling a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Of mild discomfort. Was he losing this staring battle? Yes, Bax was probably impressed by this strange figure. But what about Jason? He was the master of the situation. This was just a man in uniform, and he was supposed to react. After all, this was part of the entertainment, right? Trying to regain his confidence, Jason stepped forward, intending to get closer to the guard. If the dog didn't work, maybe a different approach was needed, but the closer he got, the more he felt a strange pressure. The guard, silent and cold, created an invisible field around him, as if his stillness was a weapon far more powerful than any words. And in that moment, when Jason was only a few inches from the guard, he suddenly realized that not everything was as simple as he had thought. As soon as a crowd started to gather around Jason and his dog, the atmosphere in the square shifted. A couple of tourists nearby noticed the scene and began quietly chatting, clearly finding the situation amusing. To them, it looked like typical tourist nonsense. A random guy with a big dog trying to provoke a reaction from a royal guard. Laughter began to spread from one person to another, and before long, the entire circle of onlookers, almost on autopilot, began commenting on what was happening. Several people had already pulled out their phones to capture the moment. Some even tried to suggest to Jason that he should become the star of a short video, as if this was some sort of prearranged skit for entertainment. Tourists were raising their hands, inviting him to pose for photos, laughing and chatting among themselves. But instead of feeling embarrassed, Jason felt his internal tension growing. He tried to mask the wave of humiliation that was rising inside him. Standing among the group of laughing people, Jason suddenly felt a pressing need to save face. Not wanting to appear weak and not wanting others to notice his insecurity, he decided to show his confidence. An idea crossed his mind. If he did something unexpected now, he could regain control of the situation and even come out on top in the eyes of the crowd. He quickly pulled his smartphone out of his pocket, as if it were his lifeline. With a determined look, he struck a pose that he thought would exude confidence, and began snapping pictures. He clicked photos from various angles, capturing both the dog and the immobile guard. He threw himself into it with genuine enthusiasm, smiling one moment and then switching to panoramic mode, trying to fit the whole crowd and the guard's tranquil moment into the shot. Jason forgot about all the traditions and rules of conduct as though this moment was his alone and no one else's. He didn't feel any respect for the situation. Instead of showing respect for the guard and his role in the royal system, he was literally using the scene for his own amusement and to attract attention from the crowd. Meanwhile, the crowd's laughter grew louder. It became almost hysterical, and some even made comments, admiring his audacity and resourcefulness. "Best moment of the day," one woman said. "Look how boldly he's taking pictures," someone whispered nearby. Friends from different corners of the world joined in the carefree laughter. Some even asked Jason to take a photo with them in front of the guard and backs. Jason felt his confidence rising. He was the center of attention, and that feeling could satisfy anyone craving recognition. At some point, he even forgot that his actions might offend someone or break some rule. All he saw were the approving faces of tourists, their approving glances, and the ongoing giggling. His camera, which had once seemed like just a way to capture memories, now became a tool he used to win this small cultural battle. However, the guard remained standing where he was. He hadn't changed a single facial expression, his gaze still cold and impenetrable. Not even the crowd could shake his calm. Everything happening around him meant nothing. This moment wasn't for him, it was for others. Jason felt his confidence beginning to melt away, dissolving in the atmosphere of the royal guard's unyielding silence. He realized that this scene, instead of creating fun, was becoming more of a challenge for him. The laughter of the crowd, which had initially seemed like a small victory, now felt like mockery. His failure in the face of the silent guard, due to the guard's absolute unflappable behavior, seemed all the more humiliating. He looked at the figure in the red uniform and black hat standing before him and felt growing irritation. Jason increasingly felt that he himself had become the object of attention, not his dog or the situation he was trying to create. It seemed absurd and unfair to him. The guard, as if not even noticing him, turned the whole performance into something much more important than just a joke for tourists. Not willing to back down, Jason decided to take one last step, trying to provoke a reaction. He stood directly in front of the guard, moving his face just a few inches from his. Bax, though a massive Rottweiler, watched the scene with interest but remained still, showing no aggression. Jason even began walking around the guard, giving a few commands to his dog, trying to provoke him to move or at least bark. His voice became more insistent. "Come on, Bax, show me what you've got," Jason whispered, hoping for some sign from his dog. But Bax remained motionless just as before. The guard, for his part, didn't move an inch. His gaze, although seemingly directed into the distance, remained cold and fixed. His face was a mask of neutrality, and every one of his movements or steps was so restrained that he seemed like part of a statue, not a living person. Jason realized that this wasn't going to be easy. He tried once more. He moved closer, smiling, with the intent to joke. "Well, buddy, didn't expect me to become your fan? Don't you want to talk to me? This is too boring." But instead of getting any response or noticeable reaction, he was met with total disregard. His words seemed to vanish into the air, provoking no movement whatsoever. The crowd, still watching the unfolding scene, began to realize that the guard just wasn't reacting. Some started whispering, others tried to take photos or videos, but no one was laughing anymore. The scene that was supposed to be funny was turning into something where Jason began to look like a person who couldn't get the attention he wanted. And that was far more vulnerable than he'd anticipated. Unable to make the guard react or even shift from his position, Jason felt his own confidence begin to crumble. He stopped abruptly, realizing that his attempts weren't just failing to bring the desired result, they were intensifying his own unease. He stepped back, glancing at the crowd. The onlookers, still watching the strange spectacle, were slowly losing interest. Some turned away, others began to leave. and Jason suddenly realized that he had become part of a failed show rather than the one controlling the rhythm of things. At that moment, he decided it was time to end it. The energy that had once fueled his desire to pull off this joke had deflated, leaving behind a sense of emptiness. Jason gave Bax a quick command and tugged him on the leash, heading off. His steps quickened, and he couldn't wait to leave the square, distancing himself from the crowd that couldn't stomach the entire performance. Jason was on the brink of disappointment. His attempts to provoke the guard had failed. The Royal Sentinel continued to stand like a statue, not moving an inch. The crowd was laughing louder and filming the scene, and Jason began to feel like the whole situation was turning into a comedy, with him as the main fool. He realized his plan had backfired, and he was about to turn around and leave, hoping to regain at least a little bit of dignity. It seemed like this was his last attempt to show confidence, but nothing was going according to his script. But just at the last moment, when Jason was about to grab the leash and lead Bax away, something unexpected happened. The guard, who had remained silent and impervious up until then, slightly leaned forward. Jason, no longer expecting anything serious, looked down, and his gaze fell on a small object right under his feet. He noticed it was an old metal item, resembling a small bronze symbol, barely visible against the pavement. Jason didn't immediately understand what it was, but then he remembered how in certain places around London, old monuments and memorial elements could be hidden in the most unexpected spots, on stones or even on the ground. The guard wasn't in a hurry. He slowly pointed to the object with the tip of his carbine and finally broke his silence. His voice was quiet but clear, with a distinctly Anglo-Saxon intonation. "This is part of a historical memorial, sir. It's best not to disregard what may be significant to the locals." The guard's words literally stunned Jason. He had never imagined that this moment, which he had initially seen as a silly tourist prank, would lead to something so serious. Finding himself at the center of attention, Jason began to realize that this little bronze piece on the ground wasn't just some random object. It was part of a local memorial, likely dedicated to an important historical event, possibly related to the royal family or the history of London itself. The silence around them deepened, and Jason felt as though his own behavior had suddenly gained an entirely new meaning. He looked at the guard, whose silence and composure now seemed not like cold indifference, but a profound respect for traditions and history. The guard, with restraint but still conveying a message, added, "A simple gesture can reveal a lot about a person, but it's important to remember that respect for this place and its history isn't just part of your visit, it's part of your experience." Jason stood in awe. He hadn't expected the situation to move beyond his expected joke and turn into a real lesson. Even now, when everything seemed so simple and insignificant, he realized he had overlooked one crucial thing. Respect for culture and history isn't something you can disregard for the sake of a fleeting amusement. The crowd, noticing the moment, also fell silent. For a while, no one spoke a word. It seemed that everyone was beginning to understand that behind this royal guard was not just a tradition, but an entire history, one in which it wasn't enough to just be present. You had to be a part of it. Jason, feeling his face flush with shame, quietly bent down to pick up the lost object. He slipped it into his pocket and briefly thanked the guard. As he made his way back to his car, Jason suddenly felt that his journey, which had begun as a simple tourist prank, had turned into an important reminder that respect for other cultures and traditions is one of the most crucial parts of any trip.